Welcome to today's webinar, January 12th, 2023, entitled Self Systems and Survival. This webinar will be a bit of a shift from what we've been discussing over the course of many months, even years, where we've looked at the impact of emerging technologies from a systems perspective, on the economy, on communities, on nations. But rarely have we discussed the impact on individuals, on the patient, on the client, on the student for that matter. And so when Bogdan and I got chatting about his experience as a survivor of two near-death events, it seemed to me that this could be quite a different session. And so I've asked Bogdan, who's an author, and he'll tell you about his book, if he'd entertain us today and participate in a discussion. Because as we've seen with fusion energy having a macro effect on maybe the world at large when it emerges, but this more recent ChatGPT, it can read, it can write, it can translate. What will that mean to us as individuals? And what has the near-death experience that Bogdan has been through had as an impact on him? So without any further ado, Bogdan, it's your turn.
It is the survival and all the psychology and psyche aspects that are captured in the book are actually very relevant from a point of technological progress and where our species seems to be now. Issues of moving towards nuclear energy or shutting down any form of energy that qualifies as dirty and so on, plus. To me, this was the joy and the motivation behind writing the book. The writing took more than 10 years.
Let me interrupt you early right here, Bogdan, before we get deep into the broader picture. What were the two events that were near-death experiences?
So I escaped out of Romania in 1987, which was the peak of dictatorial control in communist Romania. And the escape had its own adventures. I'm trying to limit how much I'm talking, but my first chance was in Cyprus to get. I was on a business trip. I was building, collecting requirements for a petroleum tanker simulator. So off that tanker, the tanker stopped, and I tried to escape in Cyprus. But Cyprus traded me back. And the trade was over weekend, so I escaped on a Saturday. As a funny anecdote, I went to the American embassy and I said, I want to defect, which was a phrase that I learned out of the movie Moscow on the Hudson. It wasn't in the Romanian English dictionary. And the Marine at the embassy very politely said, sir, it's Saturday. The immigration is closed. The immigration services are closed. Please come back on Monday. So in that process, I went to the police station there, and from the police station, somehow the Romanian embassy was notified, and Romania traded me back. Now, to return a prisoner alive, Cyprus security forces needed 3 agents. And it was a Saturday, and there was a soccer championship going on. So if they were shooting me, if I would have been dead, they needed only 1 agent. So they pulled me from the police station off the highway into a forest, made me kneel with a loaded handgun to my head. That was the first experience that I call a near-death experience. And while I was kneeling, so this is like a fraction of a second, while I was kneeling, from standing to hitting the ground, I had a flashback through my whole life. I was 30 at that time. And this flashback is extremely introspective, and it is of high resolution. It started with the first memories from kindergarten. I went to a kindergarten when I was 3 or so, 3.5. And it's, of course, it's in the mind's language, which are flashes with emotional content. And every single flash was a moral judgment for the events that were represented in the flash. This is my belief now, that this is at least a metaphor behind the notion of final judgment.
The second experience was when you were on the ship.
Second experience is actually when I was swimming. I was locked in this room, and I got out of that room at night and jumped 11 nautical miles, 14 kilometers away from the Greek island of Chios. So, and during that swimming, which was 14, 15 hours, at a certain point, towards, let's say, 3/4 into the distance, I lost synchronization. So my hands wouldn't pull together, my legs wouldn't work together, and I started sinking. I started drowning. I have the memory of blue water. You have to understand, this is the Aegean Sea in June, so otherwise beautiful. Beautiful the water, and experienced a beautiful day, but I started sinking, and I remember seeing through the volume of blue violet water, and at that moment, my guess at this stage, and it's an informed guess, is that when you come in proximity of this kind of belief that this is the end, that there are discharges, hormonal discharges, that change your standard way of accessing your mind and thinking. And at that point, I had a flow of variants of destinies of the people I was caring for. So I was offered with the story of life of the others that I cared for, in the event that I'm dying, in the event that my life ends at that moment. And after that, not even, I cannot say at the end of that, after that, I commuted in a reserve of energy. So I started swimming, I surfaced, and I swam all the way to the shore. I had the energy to start swimming parallel to the shore to find a place where I can get out. And so finally I had access to energy. I thought I don't have anymore prior to that. Again, while I always liked snorkeling, I wasn't trained for that. I didn't perform any other type of long distance swimming. I'm an electronics engineer. My work was to solder and measure, and so and the reason I'm sharing this is because we do have reserves that are impressive.
With these two experiences, which I don't think anyone here today has had quite the moments that you're referring to, where your life was literally put in front of you at risk. How does all of this translate in terms of the discussions which we've had of late, of the rate at which emerging technologies may in fact be reshaping our relationship even with ourselves?
We have lost. Technology has simplified our life, and simplifying it has also taken away some of the capabilities that we have, let's call it, in the original design. And I'm not religious. When I'm talking about design, I'm referring to the genome as a collection of knowledge that it's transferred in the phylogenetic chain of species for the last 3.6 billion years. In each of us, each of the 30 trillion cells has a library that has all the know-how that a whole phylogenetic tree has discovered in this last 3.6 billion years. There is very recent research in regenerative medicine, in which based on being able to communicate correctly with your cells, you can regenerate organs. And what was even more significant to me, if the messages that are given to those cells are wrongly assembled, the forms of life that develop replicate past species in our phylogenetic tree. Yeah. So with the technology that we have nowadays, which are this huge power of computing, this ability to collect and manage huge amounts of data, we have this race between either building something that would wipe us out, technological implementation of the great filter, or if we struggle, we can manage it in such a way that we would regain some capabilities that we might have had way back in time. The book is offering self-help with the sage advice of knowing who you are and living consistently with who you are. However, what the book does in 400 pages is it arguments why this advice is relevant at the species level, at the nation level, at the business organization level, at the family level, at the couple level, and as well as individual, which was always in focus. So when we're asking if our Premier, Danielle Smith, is right in flagging the things that she's flagging. The moment you use some of the models that I have in the book, becomes very clearly that, like, in the end, our provinces are a family, and a family, it's a socio-economic composition. In a socio-economic composition, you give and receive. There is a bi-directional exchange that makes you stable in that composition. And this give and receive, it's specific to the character of the province or the community that we're looking at. And again, life, biological life, as well as social composites that result out of biological life, have at their basis a very simple algorithm. It's called preferential attachment. And it was discovered in the world of the internet, but it was tracked down all the way to intracellular level. So when you divide as a fecundated cell, when you start dividing, the messages that tell the cells what kind of cells should they be go actually following this preferential attachment law. The preferential attachment impact is known mostly by the Pareto law. Yeah, 20% of your team does 80% of the job. 20% of your project will take 80% of your time, and so on and so on and so on. Actually, it's not 20%. For effective organisms, for living organisms that are sustainable, it's somewhere in the 9 to 12%. And what is that 9 to 12%? It's the percentage of functions that, if they work well, they can keep the whole composition together. So when I was referring, for example, to provinces and harmony, socioeconomic harmony within provinces in our nation, the things that you would have to address to achieve such a harmony actually align with this preferential attachment, and there aren't so many. So it's not about renegotiating hundreds of or thousands of relations between you and the federal government, or between you and the other provinces. They should be in tens, so to speak. And I have to put a disclaimer in the PowerPoint. I have a disclaimer. As a personality profile, I'm something that's called a blaster. So the moment I sense a certain direction, or I sense a certain pattern, I don't hesitate to talk about it. So the opposite of a blaster, it's a profile that's called a consumer. In a consumer, you read 10 years and produce a phrase. A blaster hears something and remembers something else from 10 years ago, and then makes a statement that sounds. So what I'm saying is with a certain coefficient of risk, and most likely with a certain coefficient of error. But I've done my best to make sure that what I'm sharing is anchored in more than my opinion. So it's a self-help book, but it's a self-help book for an entity that I named a lifeoid, so something that behaves like a living entity. And such lifeoids are, again, if we start, even at the individual level, we're not one individual. We are a sum of roles that can be separated, so identified in who we are. Like even if we mention again Carl Gustav Jung, and we're talking about persona and animus anima and shadow and ego and ego, it's already a couple of them, yeah. But so even for us as individuals to be comfortable and live well, we have to live with all these personalities as a good community. We have to understand each other and respect each other and benefit of each other's properties. Yeah. Good. For example, shadow accumulates usually aggression and usually anti-social and anti-moral tendencies. And the default is to push it down, to push it back. However, sometimes in life, you are required to be more aggressive and more violent than how you normally behave. So that's bringing up components from your shadow and giving them the respect for what they can do.
So in light of what we have been exposed to in the last couple of months, which is more change and the relevance of change, particularly when it's coming at, well, the ChatGPT, for example, what was your view of what the relevance of ChatGPT is to the way human beings will behave as individuals in this context of knowledge becoming a commodity, whether we remain even relevant to ourselves, much less to socially?
So I worked with artificial intelligence in a much simpler way than anything compared to OpenAI and so on. My first expert that was based on neural networks is placed in 1992. And I had prior to that other. So I have a certain familiarity with the artificial intelligence as implemented through neural networks, which are a technology that models partially how neural cells work. These are engines that extract patterns out of information, and our minds and especially the unconscious part of our mind does that. So we are essentially pattern management machines, where management includes detection, storage, refactoring, deprecation, and so on and so on. Deprecation doesn't mean forgetting. It means lowering the priority that those patterns have when they are activated. OpenAI and ChatGPT are amazing realizations, but because of where we are as humans with our minds, I consider their arrival and their release into the public as a slippery slope. You can design and produce physical and non-physical impact tools, high impact tools, without having the moral and ethical barriers raised. In us, in each of us, as per my understanding of how emergence of individuals takes place, in every thought that we have, there is that 3.5 billion years history of doing bad and seeing what doing bad causes. Right from the cell that ate the neighboring cell, through the reptiles that eat their kids, all the way to humans that kiss and hug in the public square. But all those things exist in us, and they bias our thinking. Artificial neural networks don't have that. And if you try to implement that by training them on certain patterns, it is very easy for you to create very sophisticated biased tools. My first expert system was supposed to help me identify faulty hydraulic valves on cylinders, on motion systems that were mission critical. And because debugging them with my mind was complicated, I just set an artificial neural network on top, and I would tell it whatever I could measure without knowing why, like temperature, electric noise, voltages, and so on. So I would just dump on the artificial neural network what I could measure, and within days, it was classifying 100% correct, blindly, without opening the valve or anything, just from the outside, which of the valves were faulty and which were working well. Now, I like to think that I have 30 trillion cells working behind my glasses. The artificial neural network had 500. This is the intelligence of a fly. This is the layer. Much more accurate. I expanded it to the whole system, which had several simulators, multiple computers, redundancies, interlocking, and so on. By far, the 500 neurons. So the fly was beating Bogdan Motoc, who was the designer of those systems. So I was the one that actually drew every wire that was connected, every input that was connecting, every chip that was activated by every routine in the firmware that was read by every software routine at the higher level, and so on. So the message that I have here is that the trivial human, including myself, we have lost the ability to tap into that power, while artificial neural networks of the day have the ability to tap into much smaller power, but bigger than what we can do. So in this month and a half of working with ChatGPT, I found 3 or 4 errors, very sophisticated. If I didn't know, and this is what I could find, if I didn't know the topic, if I didn't ask something that I was extremely familiar with, and if I wasn't familiar with how artificial neural networks work, I wouldn't have caught them. And one of them had diametrally opposed decision than the right decision. And I flagged it to, again, the intelligence is OpenAI. ChatGPT is the interface, intelligent interface, but the interface. So I flagged it and it excused itself and flipped 180%. So the opposite. This can be anywhere. This can be in a control system for a nuclear weapon. This can be in a control system for a nuclear plant. This can be in a IT service for governing a nation or for governing international affairs. This can be in intelligence that moves investments in various funds and businesses.
Is that not simply a byproduct of not knowing how to ask the prompts properly? I mean, I can recall asking the question of whether or not X would happen or X would not happen. And it gave me the answer that I was seeking in both instances. Yeah. And I had to, and it was Jeff that revised the prompt in such a way that I got what appeared to be a more definitive and empirical answer, because of the way the prompt was positioned. Is what you're saying is that we as human beings, if we're going to interact with neural networks and work with ChatGPT, we need to be educated so that it can in fact give us a more empirical answer. I mean, yes, you may rely on 3.5 billion, although I'm not sure the human race has been around for the 3.5 billion, but regardless, we've been around for a long while. ChatGPT relies on 8 million, 8 billion, 80 billion conversations. It seems to be tapping into a vast array of knowledge as we have that knowledge today, or we have that knowledge derived from 3.5 billion. It seems to me ChatGPT has an advantage over us because it's moving far beyond what I as an individual bring to the table. It brings potentially every human being on Earth to the table.
Yes, Perry, you're right. But so you're right, at this moment, when we interact with entities like ChatGPT, the questions are the golden components.
Right.
But the challenge that I'm flagging is that the answers are so sophisticated that we have trouble with our own minds to double check. And the answers are not what I would call it metaphorically God's answer. It's not the universe talking to us and giving the absolute truth.
Okay, so let me, I mean, this now gets very interesting, because when I go to see a doctor, I'm not sure I know how to challenge his answers either. And so who do I trust? Do I trust the GBT or do I trust my doctor, where professionals have presumably been endorsed or certified by the state as doing at least carrying the ethic of thou shalt do no harm? So my question to you and to your daughter might be, all we need to do is make sure that we have coded in thou shalt do no harm. Go on.
I'm sorry to not be able to contain myself. I would say trust your gut, because your gut has the
wiseness,
the wisdom of us and the biological organisms that came before us.
I can't say to Joe Biden when his finger's on the button, trust your gut.
Yeah, but you know what?
I mean, I understand the role that the right hemisphere plays in decision making, which is emotional and less logical. And there may be, in fact, be things in my life experience that I can't really articulate that are having a bearing on my decision.
And it's not to dismiss the importance of doing one's research.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm still, you're challenging the trusting of GPT.
Yeah.
I'm saying I'm challenging the trusting of virtually every other alternative.
Yeah.
Yes.
If Churchill says that democracy's
Yeah.
clumsy, but the best we got, maybe someone's going to be saying, yeah, human beings are clumsy, but GBT is the best we got. So trust it.
Yes, you're very right. So what was the solution life brought forward to trusting was social living. Bring more minds, spread their motivations, and see what pops up. So if we had societies of artificial intelligent entities that would compete to prove their validity, the validity of their understanding and vision of a complicated problem, yes, that would be more trustworthy. But I don't think we're there. And again, this is Bogdan speaking from Calgary, working in his basement, and so on and so on. So,
But you've got the platform today, so we've given you the we've endorsed you today.
Yeah, and Perry, when I mentioned 3.6 billion years of knowledge, what I wanted to express there, it's not that our species would be 3.6 billion years old. It's that every single cell in our body includes the design of archaea, the first cell, and each of us, it's a living replica of the first archaea that made it as a cell, as a surrounded. There was no death on the phylogenetic path.
We know that the cell physiologically has the capability of replicating the human being, but we do not know, or at least maybe you can shed some light on this. I wasn't aware that the cell actually has within the biochemistry the memory.
Oh, it does. It's cells, and this is not me. This are scientists that I discovered and I love now, because I see beauty in all this. But cells have all the functional unities that make us think that we are complex living structures. They're just present in a much more simplified implementation. But every single function that we are proud of can be traced down all the way at the cellular level, at the amoeba or other type of bacteria. And
It phylogeny reproduces ontogeny. We know that the human being, through comparative psychology, for example, and
yeah,
you know this, Morona, that as that cell evolves, we go through all of the stages of the evolution of a human being, from a reptile through a fish through etc. In order that stem cell ultimately learns to express it, or that stem cell ultimately expresses itself in an environment, and that environment ultimately is an environment of experiences, not just the environment of biochemistry.
Yes. If you remember Jordan Peterson and the whole discussion that was around his mention of lobsters.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was saying that hierarchies in communities are anchored in lobster behavior.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. And there is also a very useful and significant model. It's Paul MacLean's triune brain. Again, the model is called triune brain, but the reference is to how the mind works.
Yeah.
And Paul MacLean is proposing, simplifying the whole layering of mind functions into 3 categories: reptilian behavior, mammalian behavior, and neocortex, the neo-mammalian type of behavior. We are neo-mammalians. Our rationality and our ability to learn dampens much of the behavior of mammals, which is essentially emotional. Mammals have added emotions on top of instincts, which are essentially reptilian, to actually improve survival capabilities of reptilian design. So reptiles, if they're hungry, they're going to eat their children. Mammals have deep affection for their children. They won't eat their own children. And we will not even talk about that. Now, the beauty and the relevance in my, from my point of view, of the Paul MacLean model is that when novel layers fail, you roll back into the mental capabilities of your mind. So if your rational intents to solve a conflict or a stressful situation fail, you're becoming emotional. And if emotions don't solve it, then you become violent. And if violence with a clear target does not solve it, you become violent without a clean target, destroying anything outside your boundary, whatever that boundary is understood to be at that time. Now, this is just a 3-layer type of clustering of behavior. But this is what I'm referring to when I'm saying that
those 3 layers. I'm not familiar with Paul MacLean, but I am familiar with Freud, who talks about id, ego, superego, and those 3 relationships are very similar to the 3 levels that you've referred to.
Yeah,
it is reptilian. The superego.
Paul MacLean was, I think, 1940s or so. I don't recall. So it's relatively new. Depending on who you read, he's American or Canadian or did work in Canada or so. But he had the knowledge about genetics and deeper knowledge about physiology and so on than Freud and Jung. But Freud and Jung created their models from outside, observing behavior and recognizing patterns in that behavior. And they're both geniuses. So their ability to extract patterns, it's amazing. Paul MacLean was a professor of anatomy, so he looked also into the mechanics, into the physical, functional components of the brain, again, and mapped functionality with those very identifiable anatomically structures. It's by far not a one-to-one. It's a metaphor, but it's a working metaphor. And one of the claims that I'm making in the book, or disclaimers that I make in the book, whatever we think it's absolute science, it's nothing but a metaphor. We don't have access to the ultimate truth. We are animals that have shrunk their sensitivity and their ability to think to surviving the moment. So there is a vast reality that we cannot even imagine, that it's out there, and our ultimate knowledge and body of science and so on, it's built on the minimal things that we were able to touch and we needed to touch. Yeah, like Daniel Dennett and several Hoffman, and so they all say that our reality it's dead shrunk and simplified to be easy to handle, not to reflect the reality.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more when when you refer to the relationship between our physiology and behavior, there is a gap in there. Just like knowing the properties of hydrogen and the properties of oxygen, we would have no idea that putting them together, you would get the properties of water. There is something in the brain, and well, my PhD was in physiological psychology, and the biochemistry of memory and the neurophysiology of attention. And I was very curious as an individual in the physiological substrate behind behavior. And we could draw all we could draw is correlations. We could look at axons and dendrites, synapses, and the biochemistry in that intervening moment, and no idea where memory comes from, and no idea what those trillions of cells and their interaction may well be revealing something. I concluded that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, not something, and that will is simply a byproduct of all that, and has very little causative effect on our behavior. Now that's a hypothesis. I couldn't prove anything when it comes to the physiological substrates of behavior. All we could talk about is correlations. And it's astounding to see what the brain can do under hypnosis. Just if you want to talk about being in awe, whether it be at the end of a pistol or 13 hours in the ocean, look at what happens, what people can do under hypnosis by writing their names on their forehead. Through their blood vessels, recalling things that in a million years you'd have a considerable difficulty recollecting in memory what is in there, because everything that you're sensing at every moment of your life is going in there, but very little is being constructed, and our capacity to recollect is minimal. Anyway, I'd like to hear Morona's view on a few of these things, because she's got to be smiling because it's resonating with her experience, or it's in conflict.
Oh, it's all resonating. It's all resonating. Unfortunately, I have to jump off. I was just getting ready to thank everybody for including me, and to apologize that I had to jump off.
But your degree is in neuroscience, I gather, or that's what you're studying.
It was the broader biopsychology umbrella. So neuroscience was one of the topics of study, and thank you, Dad, for updating me to a master's. It was actually an undergraduate degree. From there, I moved on to a master's in industrial design, pursuing the values of my education in psychology through a hands-on profession.
Okay, well, in industrial design, I trust you'll take the values that your dad has imparted upon you and do a more just way of developing industries into the future. So good luck. Come back and visit us in 20 years and tell us how it panned out. We'll be waiting.
I would suggest that, Morona, that there's a tremendous room for improvement in industrial design as we know it today. And I'll leave it at that.
Oh, there's tremendous room. And, to be honest, I'm a little bit heartbroken, though not dissuaded. I have spent my industrial design career thus far working in a consultancy with many brands that you're all familiar with. And it's even with good intentions, it's incredibly hard to make positive changes. And I would say that to date, American product companies have been very profit driven, and it by and large, and it does not, in my opinion, pan out for a greater good.
But this raises a fundamental question. So we see the abuse as a byproduct of the pursuit of profit.
Mhm.
There's another form of abuse as a byproduct of the pursuit of politics, because we get frustrated, we don't know. Therefore, we take the politic, which is the accumulation of votes versus dollars. I still haven't found the system that I would say I trust more than another than the democracy, as clumsy as it is, being a regulator of the for-profit and saying, all right, I'll give the political system, democracy as we call it, regulatory authority to mitigate the excesses of profit. So that's my balance of powers. I'm hoping that GPT is bringing a new force to the game, where the regulatory authority is set with a political system. We may be able to put a regulatory wrapping around GPT and be able to regulate through it.
I have concerns. My father is a technology lover, and while I love and respect him, I have real concerns about the ways that technology separates people from their intuitive knowledge, because there are biases that are built into the machine. I cannot speak to the biases of AI, but it takes me back to an interview that I was listening with a designer about racist biases in how web platforms are designed, even in terms of accepting the name formats of people of a non-Western cultural origin. And sorry to cut you off.
That point that you're making resonates well with me, where I have been professing that it's about time we brought arts and science together again.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
And that I think that, you know, the bringing together of the relevance of emotions to logic, which is the way the brain does indeed function with the right and left hemisphere, is we bring a better decision to the table. But we've been caught up in the power of science and logic so far, and denying the relevance of values and the shaping of those.
And emotions have logic. They have biological origins. They have substance. It's not a substance that we've quantified and respected of late.
Mm-hmm. Well, good luck. I know
Thank you.
Can I check out without embarrassment? Yes, you can. And thank you for speaking.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
join us again someday and bring some friends. You know, it's one thing to listen to a lot of bald-headed guys having a chat. It's another one to listen to what the insights of youth, because you've just brought to the table a very, very important point that I hope youth are paying a lot of attention to, and that is the relevance of these relationships, where we fell in love with science and have chased it for years. And I'm beginning to think that ChatGPT may just trigger the discussion about what and where does emotion, or where do the arts, or where do values, what role are they to play? I'm hoping we don't forget. Maybe it's because I'm learning to play the piano.
And I would suggest, I hope that Mirona continues to keep in touch with us, because she's offered just an incredible, interesting insight into this conversation. It's and if anything, it's only been the tip of the iceberg, I believe, in terms of what Mirona could offer. And it'd be delightful to hear from her in the future, and certainly being able to digest some of the interesting things that this group of hopefully clever folks continue to evolve and put forth and record. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from you, Mirona.
In other words, goodbye. We've enjoyed your company.
Can you put your email in the chat? Oh, I guess she's gone.
Well, Bogdan can get it for us.
Yeah, mirona.motoc@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat.
So, Randall, can you in short form share with us what you were sharing with me this week about energy in the cosmos, that for all of the dark matter that's out there and the emptiness, that in fact it's not empty, it's full of energy that's contributing to the expansion of the universe at speeds I thought that were speeds equivalent to the speed of light, but you had some insights there, and I'm not quite sure I understood fully what you were reading. You want to take yourself off mute and share that, or am I embarrassing you?
So were you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were talking about major breakthroughs toward the end of 2022, and I wasn't quite sure how to interpret what I had come across, but it seems like there is a sort of a gathering consensus, maybe, among astrophysicists that there's that the universe that we thought was an empty vacuum is actually filled and alive and bustling with all kinds of what do they call it? Foam. I know there's a couple others here who are more familiar with this and could put it into perspective. Is there actually a breakthrough here, or was that article I found simply kind of a capstone on many years of research?
Well, I know when I read it, I'll do the very best I can to summarize what it was saying, that as we have looked out at the universe at large, there are phenomena like the gazillion numbers of galaxies that are out there, but the speed at which the universe is expanding on these and dark matter, and the belief that the universe was made up of ether, well, that was not, no one ever discovered the ether. What it was made up of space, empty space, but energy travels through that space because light travels through that space. And it was my understanding the expansion of the universe was a byproduct of light, that as light moved at the speed of light, that light continued to penetrate from the Big Bang onward. And the universe continued to expand. Whether it expanded linearly or whether it would curve back on itself as a byproduct of gravity is a question in itself. And I think Einstein was of the view that light could be bent. Therefore, if light is what's expanding the universe, it will bend back upon itself. And there we have this circular, everlasting experiment that when does light come back to where it originated?
I think it's had more to do with the actual average density of the universe as opposed to light directly. But the universe has been expanding. I don't want to say faster than the speed of light, but if you consider blueberry muffin, for example, and put yourself as a blueberry within that muffin, as it is in the oven baking, it gets bigger. Space is getting bigger, and everything within it is moving away from each other.
Right.
So anything past 18 billion light years from now, we will never see.
Right.
Way off into the future, billions of years, the sky will be totally dark, except for the Andromeda galaxy, which is close enough to consider as part of our own mass.
Mhm.
But the thing you're talking about, Randall, and the emails you and I have had together, it was an interesting article, but there's been a lot of discussion in the astrophysics area for years on different views to that. So, I think it's encouraging to see a lot of different views come in, but we still have a long way to go before we figure out exactly how this whole thing started.
Mhm.
And it's like the energy. I guess I've read one particular book with one comment stuck with me that small subatomic particles come into and out of existence all the time.
Mhm.
There's lots of energy out in the vacuum of space. And when they come into existence and another one comes into existence, it's like I don't know, I want to use the word, the theme from Star Trek, for example, matter and antimatter, the two of them come together, annihilate each other, and they're gone. And then somewhere else, something else comes. And at one point, you actually get this, let me call it the Big Bang kind of, and then 380,000 years of expansion. And then we get to where we are at 13.8 billion years later.
Bogdan?
This reminds me, and I would love to share the story with the two-dimensional world.
Yep.
And the journey that the individual in the two-dimensional world has and how impossible it is to communicate back to two-dimensional people the three-dimensional reality. Carl Sagan, I think he has the original story. This is where we are. Like it's we've selected a certain number of dimensions in which our science is working to come up with models, but those are not the absolute. So we're in for this kind of surprises with things that come into the universe and disappear, and we have no clue where they go, and energies that come and go, and so.
Well, mathematically, it's all described multidimensional. It's easy to see the multi-dimensions in math, but not so easily in physical world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems that when those physics equations go into the multi-dimension domain, they tend to be on a very microscopic, nanoscopic level. So those dimensions, whether it be string theory or what have you, exist on an incredibly small scale. So it's not as if there's another dimension across the street from us that we don't see.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, on Friday of this week at 10 o'clock Eastern time, Francois, what's his name, Champagne, is going to be making an announcement at the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo about presumably some big grant to the Perimeter Institute for expansion of quantum physics research. And there's an awful lot, there's classical physics and then the quantum physics. The two right now don't meet. There's no universal theory that Stephen Hawking was looking for. But in my correspondence anyway with one of the people I talked to back there, she says it's promised to be a very interesting revelation. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Well, is it a revelation or simply a grant?
Well, I don't. I think it's a grant, but I don't know what it's referencing. I don't know what it's referencing.
I think it may reference. There's some very interesting stuff in the geek headlines these days about having created, at least on a simulation basis, a wormhole. Yep. using black holes. So, and that's been in theory for a long time, but apparently over the last few weeks, there's been some interesting theoretical work supported by simulations around creating a stable wormhole. So of course that would be very, very fascinating and interesting on so many levels.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm also reminded when Bogdan was talking about life and death experiences, we still can't explain consciousness, but there are a couple of interesting hypotheses coming out of quantum entanglement. I know that Rupert Sheldrake, who's a microbiologist, molecular biologist, and someone I follow, Erwin Laszlo, who's a physicist and systems thinker. These guys are going back to ancient wisdom, such as Akasha, or Akashic record, that it comes out of, I believe, Hindu beliefs and Taoism too. The idea being that there may be a field of information out there. Much of our physics talks about energy, but what about form? Where does that come from? Yeah. Why is it that we have logic and mathematics shaping everything that happens? Where do these laws come from? And they kind of postulate that there is a field, something like an energy field, but it's about form and not energy itself. And we'll notice that energy and form always coincide. Energy always has some form attached to it, and vice versa. They're never separated. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
Interesting, Randall, that that had we been having this conversation 300 years ago, it would have been very much geared to religion and spirituality and God and whatnot. And
Yeah.
now, with the advent of science, we're having very, very similar conversations, but it's brought another, I guess, perspective to it, and that's I'd really like to hear everybody's reaction, thoughts around that.
Well, on the chat, there was a comment made about trust again, and I shared I think it was Berkeley, the philosopher, who said we can never know anything. We can only have faith that we know, meaning the ultimate is to have faith.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about religion per se. I'm talking about having the belief that you know, therefore you have faith.
Mhm.
So it ultimately boils down to trust. We trust our eyes, we trust our ears reasonably. We trust that gravity will do what it's doing, but it's all relative. I mean, it's relative to our experiences. Not to say that we've got 3.5 billion years of personal experience to share.
And
But-
how much of that is our own cognitive bias that is
Well,
filtering?
I think that's a point that you made, and I think it's a wise thing that if the scientist lives in the understanding of faith, that they believe a law to be true until such time as evidence proves it not to be true. So
I'd
scientists are
respectfully,
skeptics, but we have this mindset that somehow the scientist has access to truth which is everlasting and indisputable. That's not so. A law.
no. And I think most scientists would not agree with that perspective, Perry. I think
No.
most scientists would probably say that science is about trying to find holes in their own theories, putting forth hypotheses and trying to prove their hypotheses wrong. That should be the end goal, not trying to prove their hypotheses right.
Well, you can't prove anything is right. You can only prove it's wrong. That's the null hypothesis.
and that's what empirical evidence is all about. But what's important is in terms of the design of the experimentation and the hypothesis, there is often cognitive bias built into
Understood.
Sure. and so that's what we have to kind of try and get outside of,
Well, recently I've been wondering if it's impossible. Perhaps bias is synonymous with knowledge. Can you have knowledge without a bias?
Well, we've talked about uncertainty,
Yeah.
which is a byproduct of the Big Bang and the way the universe has evolved and how mankind has evolved. Is our progress and our capability as human beings to interact with our environment is a byproduct of being uncertain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Your eyes will die if they're not stimulated.
Yeah.
Your mind will not learn unless you are confronted with uncertainty. You learn nothing by knowing. You only learn as a byproduct of being confronted with something that has never happened before. That's the value.
In fact, quantum physics is based on Heisenberg's uncertainty principles.
Right.
So everything is really just about probability, and that's about as good as we can get, as much as we know about quantum.
That's quantum theory, is the probabilistic explanation of nature, where the classical Newtonian physics was more linear, x times y equals z, whereas in quantum physics it's all probabilistic. The location of the electron is a probabilistic estimate.
But
And that's
even
where
weather prediction
information
on
theory.
the large scale weather prediction is probabilistic, isn't it? It's not. It's probabilistic because we can't possibly know all of the chaotic gazillions of contributing factors, right?
Well, let's stop there for a minute. Why not? When you say it's impossible,
I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just saying we just don't have the computing power at this point, right?
Well, that's what I think this environment that we're going into, where there appears to be so much power built into the capacity of the computer to touch literally every human being on Earth and their experiences all amassed into this one brain. That one brain says, here's what I can see, and we still want to have some doubt. but someone would say, well, this is 99.8%, where before it was 60% or whatever. The radiologist reading an X-ray.
Yeah. So we're
said,
coming back to that
80%
original
accurate. Whereas
point.
the GPT says, I'm 99% accurate.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're entering into an environment where the degree of uncertainty seems to be getting lesser and lesser. And what does that mean to the human being who says, well, it's I live in a relative environment. All of a sudden, I don't live in a relative. I don't trust what my mom and dad said anymore. I want to go to the Facebook or GBT or the organizer.
Mhm.
You know, we're breaking down our social structures because trust is moving or growing in these other entities. It grew in democracy. I'll trust democracy. Well, I'll trust GPT. Is there going to be a transition as people move from trust in professions to trust in the handheld that they've got? I mean, the doctors that I've talked to, the research that I did 3 years ago, where I asked the professions whether or not they were under siege, and they said, yes, our clients are no longer clients.
Mhm.
They're no longer prepared to be slaves as in Roman times. They now feel they know, and they want a discussion, and they want evidence, and they want explanation,
Mhm.
and they come in armed. The client is no longer a patient. They're
So
active.
don't we have
The
to
systems
really?
The systems haven't adapted to the fact that the customer is different
Yeah.
today.
And perhaps part of the answer to that, part of the solution is adopting the diplomatic notion of trust with verification. You know, so on one hand, it's great to be skeptical, but and as we should, but we have to be educated to be able to do a bit of a personal deep dive into.
Okay, so
the
take that for a moment. When I put self, systems, and survival together as the headline, and I did that as a byproduct of the discussions we've been having around ChatGPT.
Mhm.
Put that in a triangle: self, systems, and survival. Who are we talking about surviving? I think the individual will survive before the system will survive, and the systems haven't changed yet.
Mhm.
So in this paradigm that we're moving into at a speed far faster than anybody, and systems can react. We're seeing the governments that have regulatory authority, they can't do procurement of an F-35, much less develop a payroll system. And McKinsey's being sued now for being an advisor. I mean, the whole thing seems to be chaotic. So it seems to me the systems are under siege today, which is good news, as a byproduct of what? The belief that the client, as ignorant, or maybe they've had the gun to their head and they're brighter, or they've jumped off a ship and they've swum for a while and they believe they've had insight. We have assumed the client as being ignorant in the face of the system, and it's not so at all. That's what democracy has been based on, is that somehow the collective wisdom of the masses, with whatever level of informed consent, will find an answer, and will find the right answer, at least the right answer for them. And that's
Perry,
what ours would say. But
we're
no
at
one would say the right answer for them may not be the right answer for the future.
I believe we are at a tipping point in that we are seeing these mind-boggling discoveries and inventions as a result of collective intelligence facilitated through the internet. But as and network effects go, we also can experience negative network effects. This is related to diseconomies of scale, which are universal laws, so
Right,
scaling
right.
law. So what happens is that at some point, when the system that we're embedded in becomes too complex, we start getting negative network effects, which is otherwise known as noise. There's too much interference, and things start to break down, and trust breaks down, and social bonds break down.
So
Pulling back to try to secure their personal space, but we're disengaging from a system that has a life of its own here, and it's I think we don't know where this is going to go. We're at beyond a sustainable level of complexity in our society.
So it's not new, Randall, to say that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, or entropy ultimately leads to the dissolution of the system. But think about this for a moment. if maybe knowledge, if power corrupts absolute, maybe knowledge is corrupting. Maybe knowledge itself, as we assemble more and more and more knowledge, it becomes corrupting.
Well, it certainly has a breakdown. There is an entropy that kind of takes over here, and a degeneration of meanings. All knowledge is based on meanings, and those meanings are breaking down because there's too much complexity, and different. Same message may mean different things to different people.
Can ChatGPT save us by simplifying?
Not yet.
Just on that comment, Perry, about ChatGPT, I know that it was said before that you have to be cognizant of the type of question you're asking it. So I asked it, I got the briefest answer ever to anything I've ever asked the thing. But I asked this question, and inappropriately so, I guess, do you trust yourself? And the answer I got back was, as an artificial intelligence, I do not have the capacity for trust or distrust. I am a machine that processes information and responds based on programming and data that I have been trained on.
Right, right.
It's already got its own biases.
That I have been, well, no, but
Yeah.
it's a
They
principle.
received them from the
A good one.
programmer.
I am a byproduct of my experience, which I would say on my DNA, it says it is a byproduct of the information it's been trained on. It's honest about that. That is its limitation.
But it should be confident that it is what it is, so to speak. So the answer is very interesting. There is a bias that I sensed in ChatGPT that's related to political correctness in the neoliberal manner. So the moment you take questions into controversial fields, it just bounces back and you get 60%.
Bogdan, when we talked about prompting, I mean, I wish Jeff was here right now because he's had more experience in the shaping of prompts. I experienced exactly the point that you're making of that bias, but the question, you could reshape that question to get past that bias if you know it. And that's why I think that the training that we need to start exposing people to that use GPT is how to ask proper prompts.
Yes.
I've asked ChatGPT politically weighted questions such as what is the Palestinian perspective on Israeli occupation? What is the Irish nationalist perspective on the Northern Ireland and some of these other very political? And to your point, Bogdan, while it offers some interesting historical evidence, it shies away from any kind of alignment, and that caveat is very apparent, which is sort of interesting, and I think it's a good thing.
You can then ask it, Kevin, however, to intervene and tell me which is right and which is wrong, and it won't give you an answer. But you can then say, from a Western perspective, what is right or wrong, or from a Chinese cultural perspective, because you still have to give it a value to make a judgment. And I think in that respect, it's honest.
So Kevin, have you asked the simple question, what is climate change? Because that I can find being an existential threat to humanity or the largest hoax ever created.
Right.
Both of those answers exist.
It'll give you both.
It will give you both.
Is the cat in the box dead or alive?
They have the Chat GPT has to be making assumptions about what you intend in your meanings, and when it gives you an answer, we interpret what it's meaning. But in a sense, the connotations behind any of the words used are indefinite. They just go on indefinitely, and you may come back to the same answer tomorrow and get a different meaning out of it, and the day after that, yet a different meaning. Yep. It's in flux all the time.
So
Well,
exactly, Randall, to your point, I believe that we probably and unconsciously ask questions to Chat GPT that are somewhat weighted one way or the other, and it responds accordingly. The algorithms are clever enough to figure out what we're looking for an answer, and I think that's interesting. But it still speaks to our own. It speaks to the cognitive biases of the person who is asking the question.
Right. And that's, so it's behaving no differently than how we behave when someone asks us a question.
Yeah.
Or we ask a human being a question. How much cognitive bias is there in the questions that we're asking?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Perry. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Who, me? Cutting me off? Don't worry
No,
about it.
It's happened before and it will happen again.
we need a
ahead,
little.
I have something
ahead.
brand new that I've never seen on the internet before.
Go ahead, Jack.
Not been on ChatGPT, but they've just notified me. I was going to ask that question on what is climate change. There's no intonation on that. It's 2 words, 2 English words, and it says Chat GPT is at capacity right now.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I can
Yeah.
never seen Google ever hit capacity.
Wow.
That GPT has been at capacity for a couple of weeks now, since probably about the middle of the month, the end of last month.
In that regard, I got to ask you guys a question, because I'm asking others, and let me see what you have to say. So I've clearly come out of retirement again. I don't know whether the word is or reincarnation. I try to figure out what it is. But one of the things that's really got my attention is, of course, this discussion around AI. And so I've contacted the U of A, Alta ML, Innovates Alberta, et cetera, about 6 Deloitte's, about whether or not there is an interest in putting a steering committee together to design an AI conference, specifically around Chat GPT, in a way, in a similar way as to conference that was designed on analytics, big data in the cloud back in 2000, I think it was 2013.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And the way that conference was put together is with a matrix. We had industries, but then we had processes that we were looking at as well. And one of the processes right now is what's called derivative legislation. Is the movement of knowledge has typically led to some commercial transaction. When Chatbox goes commercial, how does it get paid in order to give you an answer to a question? That really hasn't been figured out yet. And the courts would have one hell of a time today figuring out how to allocate a commercial, how to value a commercial transaction when you're deriving it from such a voluminous base of data. I think that would be one of the questions in the conference. So I'm very curious to see if I've still got enough impact to actually put a steering committee together of some, Bruce Matichuk's working on it. We talked about that last week with Bruce, and he's done a little bit of his homework. I think this could be a fascinating topic, maybe for next fall, but I'll let the steering committee decide when and what is to be discussed. But this isn't going to go away.
What happened to fusion, Barry?
It's more long-term. We're still
Yeah,
meeting.
no, I hear you. I'm
Discuss it.
just being a bit facetious.
I mean, it was
I just-
fusion that woke me up first, and then chat came the following
So,
week.
so who's seen the? I had to Google it, but it came out in 1980. It's a movie called Airplane.
Yeah,
Everyone see that? If you haven't seen it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember the actor's name, but he's running in the tower and he's saying, as things go from bad to worse, says, pick the wrong week to quit smoking. And it was to quit drinking and then sniffing glue. And I was thinking about half an hour ago, Perry, that you picked the wrong quarter to retire or the wrong year to retire.
Well, so I'm not going to die. I just have to make sure these stem cells kick in and we can have everlasting life and keep the journey going. So
Absolutely. I'd like to offer some horsepower for that vision, Perry, both on AI these chat products as well as anything we can do in Fusion in terms of design and heavy lifting to, you know,
Well,
Perry,
Go ahead, Barry.
yeah, when it's a while ago now, but when I was the CEO of Azra, the AI agenda that very quietly was the lead of the AI agenda in Alberta was at the University of Lethbridge. And I don't feel that there's any, from this conversation, any linkage there. And maybe that's because it never survived or thrived, but I kind of doubt it. But they weren't very tied into other Canadians.
Well,
Do you know anything about it?
Well, I know Lethbridge got a significant brain institute to do brain research. I wasn't
Yes.
aware of the AI. Is that what you're referring to, or was there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's come of that. I do know, and I'm going to express a cognitive bias, that I did not pursue academia with the PhD in brain research because I was of the belief that nothing was going to happen of significance in my lifetime. And I think that's exactly true. I don't think we have a clue, a freaking clue as to how the brain does what it does. We may find certain parts of the brain light up, and certain parts of the brain are involved in sensory matters or verbal, but we don't know how the brain does that. The biochemistry of the brain is totally unknown. It's astounding.
Well, I know in the discussions I had with them at that time, and they were in very tight IP discussions with multinationals based offshore, and that they would disagree with you.
Really,
But that's a long time ago. And I've had a gap in between.
They would disagree that we will make discovery, or they would disagree that they have already made discovery.
No, that they were on the road to making discovery.
I just read an article this week about which sciences have made any discoveries in the last 50 years, implying that we really haven't made a lot of headway with the amount of research money that we're spending in the social sciences and in brain research. We've been spending a lot of money. We haven't really found out very much. And I would reinforce that. And I'm not a skeptic. I think I'm being a realist. But the people that I've talked to that went on to academia, who I graduated with, would echo my sentiment that we really haven't found very much. We've done a lot of publishing, publisher perish. And yeah, how many angels on the head of a pin is about the summary of it.
And I would suggest, Perry, that all of the major neuroscientists, thinkers in the world would concur. I mean, especially when it comes to understanding mind, you know, and consciousness and whatnot. You know, they'll sit around in conferences and they'll, you know, put forth all kinds of great theories and whatnot, but they will all admit at the end of the day that they really don't have a clue. In terms of you know, the mechanisms of consciousness and theory of mind and a lot of these.
Well, if you know, my hypothesis is that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, that we will never be able to derive why water is a byproduct of bringing hydrogen and oxygen together, just as we will not be able to derive why consciousness emerges as a byproduct of the thalamus and the neocortex, blah blah blah. So if it's an epiphenomenon, it still has value. I mean, it's still worth studying and understanding how it works. But to understand the underlying physical or biochemical substrates, I don't think we'll ever find it, because I don't think it's there. I think consciousness is an epiphenomenon of that. And if that's the case, what are the epiphenomenon going to be of chatbot? We may end up finding that what the computer ultimately generates is something that we have never seen before. And someone was saying with two chatbots recently in California were talking to one another and began to talk in a language that the researcher didn't understand, and they shut it down.
All right.
So you know, that raises an interesting question, Perry, in that if we don't understand our own human consciousness. And here we are creating artificial intelligence that's creating all these very interesting things that we don't understand. That does that perhaps add to the argument that artificial intelligence will finally interpret us as a risk? And
let's be clear. We are on a journey that we are not leading.
exactly.
Mankind is on a journey that mankind is not steering.
Yeah.
And that is the element of uncertainty that makes the journey so fucking interesting.
and potentially frightening.
It's got to be both ways. I mean, uncertainty has both elements to it. There's that excitement of looking ahead, and there's that fear of what we might find.
It kind of makes the Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, take on a quite a light.
But it's probably never been any different. When you walked out of the cave and you weren't sure what was outside the cave, somebody went outside the cave. And I used to tell students, don't be afraid to get out of the cave.
Yeah.
The prof who said to me, you've been in the lab for 15 years. You're now out in the real world. Lift your head up and look at it. It can be enormously exciting, but it's going to be full of threats too. So what is life?
Well, you know, it's interesting because over the last few years, as you know, Perry, I've been working with Karen Simmons and the whole the autism world and whatnot. And we have had a number of really interesting conversations with Temple Grandin. And Temple Grandin's premise is that, for example, had it not been for autism or neurodivergence, we might all still be sitting in caves, sitting around fires and talking about how we killed the last woolly mammoth. And so it's sort of interesting that what we might think about in terms of some sort of illness or problem with the human mind is actually a trigger to further cognitive and consciousness evolution. So I would kind of want to put my pennies on that, and just in terms of being thinking in terms of the positive opportunities for human evolution.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to make progress. No company makes progress, no person makes progress without confronting some uncertainty.
Yeah.
If you stay in certainty and safe space, you get status quo. And that's my hit on systems, self systems and survival. Is systems are all about status quo. They don't by and of themselves evolve until confronted with a crisis or a shock of some sort. So that's the good news of the Russian-Ukrainian war, is that something is going to come out of it. Now, it could be worse or it could be better, but something is shocking Europe right now. And I suspect out of it, if you have faith in democracy and in the West, that there will be a byproduct and it will be positive, but it's going to be a high price to get there.
It always is.
So I'm not
the biggest advances come with a higher cost, historically.
No risk, no reward.
Well, what's the Chinese proverb? In every crisis, there's
An opportunity.
the yin yang. The yin yang is there's this balance.
Danger, opportunity is the same symbol.
So Bogdan came out of his crisis and found a silver lining in it.
Yep.
And I think that there's where I've been wrestling the last few days with someone who in the educational system has been horrified of what has happened to the kids. With 2 years of lost social development and 2 years of lost education in a system today that is blaming them for the mess that they now bring into the classroom. These kids are lost, and the system is blaming them, not the system that bailed out on them.
Well, you know, Perry, I think you would agree that there's a whole series of webinars that we could engage in just around criticizing the education system and identifying its flaws and figuring out what needs to be done to improve it.
Let me give you an example of what's going on with woke. As you know, woke is very popular within the left leaning. I don't want to get into the left and right, but systems are now being confronted that they are insensitive to the individual. They need to become more woke. So in Morinville, there is a girl who claims she's a cat.
Mhm.
So how did the system respond? They got a
Cat
litter
food?
box for her. That's a fact. Is the system gone mad? They had a handicapped washrooms before. Those handicapped washrooms now have no doors on them, and they're unisex. And that's where they go to smoke their drugs in the schools. Have we gone mad? I mean, ever happened to discipline? Whatever happened? There are some core values in a society, in a family, in a classroom, which says there's right and wrong.
Yep.
Is that
Well,
is
Perry,
this a political practice?
let's be fair to the system. That same system is teaching a Ukrainian 5-year-old boy and a Ukrainian 12-year-old boy that our family has taken under our wing. That same system is teaching those people and feeding and housing 12,500 other Ukrainian refugees in the city of Calgary today. So there's examples of things gone sideways. There's risks on the future of technology that could drag society in all sorts of different and dark places.
Sure.
That's why it's time for the good guys to get going, and we
Well,
need to stay engaged.
I think we need more apply these smart technologies and methodologies to manage the complexities that we're facing, and where we don't, we see failures. And it's not just a breakdown of shared meanings, it's a breakdown of shared values as well. Because, yeah, morality, personally, I'm less morally judgmental than I am. If I see some part of our system breaking down, I don't blame the individual or the governance. I blame our system for not providing adequate tools for managing complexity. There's not a moral judgment, though.
So the self, systems, and survival is exactly what Kevin, I'm trying to get at with those three words. And Randall, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, is to what extent do we need to educate the individual in order that they compromise their self in the face of what the system requires? Or to what extent does the system need to be adaptive because the individual is now changing? Or you bring in a technology like chatbot, which may bias the changes such that both parties need to, and that system may die in the face of a new system evolving. So when technology enters into this soup of selves and institutions, as chatbot has, I think we're facing a major rethink. Anyway, some will call it a reset, but I think we're facing a major reset, and I think it's positive. I'm hoping that out of this, that the self actually becomes, well, humanism advances instead of giving up. Bud Norris would say humanism can give up. The robots will be the future. And what says that human beings necessarily have to survive into the future anyway? That's a reasonable hypothesis. But I think the tension right now, will be increased dramatically as a byproduct of things like ChatGPT and when fusion comes along.
But Barry, don't you think that humans still occupy potentially the domain of ethics, and ethics is a domain that will be very challenging for or AI to really.
I would agree with you with one proviso. We've got to get the politics out of ethics.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about, when we talk about political
Or the lack of
correctness,
ethics out of
all of that
politics.
silliness. Yeah, you're right.
Your faith in ethics is a similar faith that the world of finance has in audits. How much faith do you have in audits when you look at Anderson and KPMG and blah, 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 and McKinsey? I mean, where is the regulatory system that you can say, I trust it is in fact checking the system to ensure that it's humanist? We got this ESG now. It's going to be the grand savior of protecting us from capitalism. And now ESG has been biased. You got this book, where is it? Surveillance, the Age of Surveillance Capitalism. If you haven't read it, it's really worth a read. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It says it all about the emergence of data and access to data in industry, at the individual level, in the professions. And it says data is going to be manipulated by capitalism. Follow the dollar.
Well, it already is.
Politics is manipulated by capitalism.
Of course it is.
Look at Facebook, Google, YouTube.
All of that.
Amazon. It's all happening yesterday.
We have gone 18 minutes overtime. What the hell's going on today?
Is
Bogdan,
your wine
you lit-
open? Did you
you
open
lit a
your wine?
fire.
That's probably the problem. I
We,
need wine.
Claire, you want to
I'm
have a
gonna
last?
close. I have to run and get the barbecue fired up. 10-second commercial.
Yeah, go ahead.
We need and we have a new form of organization that that is as fundamentally different as the idea of a corporation 200 years ago helped proprietors embrace the opportunity to industrialize. We now need a form of organization to help humanity come to terms with complex systems and the complexity we've created, which is only going to be accelerated by technologies like AI, machine learning, etc.
So I agree with you, Greg. The challenge, of course, in the world, in the Western world as we know it, is an ideas are a dime a dozen. Until the mass, the collective, feel the pain or the promise is great enough, a second coming or whatever it might be, it's just another idea in the soup.
It's how, if we're actually going to use technology to unleash that idea, just like people, some proprietor, some shoemaker figured out the idea of bringing the idea of a corporation to the opportunity to build a shoe factory to make 1,000 pairs of shoes a week.
The tipping point is worth reading again.
Yeah, S curve of innovation is, but it's early days, but it's actually where we're at is we've developed the idea,
Yeah,
we've developed the practices and the processes
we
and
need
the
the crisis.
workflow.
We need the crisis.
But what we have is,
Yeah.
what we're talking to partners about is collaborative digital platforms. So that idea becomes
How do you
simple.
how do you create a crisis or find one? How do
I
you
think
take
we're in
the
one.
pandemic and use the pandemic as the trigger? Or how do you use fusion? Or how do you use chatbot to trigger the systems overhaul and the reset? We're
It's not
getting
even
lots
overhaul,
of,
it's just a transition to a new way of working together, just like the adoption of the corporation of a body of people to give people the opportunity to capitalize and actually execute industrialization.
well, at government levels, there's 56 or 80 governments that believe there's a crisis and have come together to form a new institution called WEF. And the World Economic Forum says, we are the system of the future, and we will help direct where your nations need to go in order to make your way through these transitions.
That private closed club that are definitely concerned about the environmental sustainability of the planet, and 80% of them show up in private jets. You know, that's.
I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but there you have an example of where nations are coming together. The United Nations was another example. After World War II, that was a crisis. It triggered action, and Roosevelt and Stalin and whatever got together and said, we need to form a new institution in order to ensure peace. And then entropy kicked in. Now we have the World Economic Forum.
Well, a new organization that doesn't do action, they leave the action to the members. That's the fundamental flaw with the UN. Is they have no authority to do anything except write reports and talk about
But
how bad
maybe
things
that's a good thing. Having authority would make it autocratic, dictatorial in 1984 all over again.
So it's got to be top down and bottom up.
Says now, go home and do your good works. You've simply come to us for an education. Now Adam and Eve, go on out and make for a better world.
You know, we're probably surrounded by a meta intelligence, a kind of collective intelligence that we're not even aware of. You know, in the zeitgeist of our civilization, there's all kinds of synergy and emergence going on that we're probably not aware of. But I can't be sure that that civilization will be a self-organizing, viable system. Parts of it are, but as a whole, is it a viable system the way it's currently configured?
Well, stay tuned. We're going to find out this coming week. I got to check out. Goodbye, guys. Thanks, Bogdan. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you,
Ogden,
everybody.
we need to have a coffee in Calgary here, if you
We
can
did.
We're
make
ready.
the time.
Take
I
care.
sent a note to your daughter and copied you on it.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good to see you guys again.
Claire, thank you.
Thank you. We never did get to your slides.
There will be another time. Bye.
Okay,
That's
everyone.
actually might be a good thing. How are you doing, Claire?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, same to you.
Yeah, I love really pretty awesome conversation.
It always.
Perry picked the wrong year to retire.
Well, I didn't think that was going to last very long.
Well, if you're doing what you love, but I think
Yeah.
supporting him in this,
Yeah.
I think is really important.
It's
It's one thing when it's all
The old
you do it by
saying,
yourself.
if you do what you love, you never have to work a day in your life.
Absolutely. However, if you're doing it by yourself and you're doing all the lifting, that's not a very sustainable proposition. And so I think we all are smart enough, we're all good enough at what we do that we can help Perry carry that ball a little bit, if you're
Yeah.
open to it. And I keep offering my support and you know, we'll get there. It's been a fun fall. And now we're into some brand new stuff too.
Yep.
So you be well and we'll be in touch.
You
Maybe
too,
see you
great.
next week.
Good to
Cheers.
see you. Bye. Cheers.
Bye now.